Christians. Have you ever thought about the various roles taken by women in their homes and outside? What are the challenges faced by women today? From my questions itself, you understood that I am going to focus on women. Yes, indeed our first unit focused on the celebration of womanhood. Our first chapter is 3 L's of Empowerment. It is a speech by Christine Lagarde. She speaks on the need for empowering women in the 21st century. Okay, take your notebook. Your first assignment is prepare the profile of Christine Lagarde. Prepare the profile of Christine Lagarde. Before going to the detail of the chapter, we can watch the speech of Christine Lagarde itself.
So good afternoon to all of you. If anybody has to leave within the next 25 minutes, please feel free to do so. You can even leave now, because that's about how much I'm going to take off your attention span. Talking about what you're most concerned about, which is the role of women. But I'm going to use my IMF angle, if you will, to probably focus a bit more on economy than on politics. And I have huge admiration for what the NDI does, yes, Ken, and yes, everybody else on the board who has stood up earlier, for the task that you deliver and for the objective that you have to empower in the democratic process. And I would like to just take my hat off to those who are going to be in Ukraine in the next few days. I would also obviously like to recognize Madeleine Albright. Madeleine is a mentor to many of us. She's certainly a mentor for me. And having read quite a few of her books, I can tell that I'm constantly inspired by her leadership, by her resilience, by her smile, and by, as some of you mentioned earlier, the sense of humor that she brings into any difficult situation. Madeleine, thank you for what you're giving us and will continue to give us. Thank you. Okay, I want to begin today with a well-known puzzle. For those of you who know about it, don't say. A young boy is involved in a traffic accident and is immediately rushed to the hospital for urgent surgery. In the bustle and chaos of the hospital environment, the surgeon strides into the operating room. Think of the quintessential surgeon. Brimming with confidence and authority, a true type A personality, one who knows instinctively how to take charge. Yet, this distinguished surgeon looks down at the boy and gasps, saying, "I can't operate on this boy. It's my son." Now, indeed, the boy is the surgeon's son, yet surgeon is not the boy's father. So who is that? I know everyone in the room can see the answer immediately. You are aware. It is simple. The surgeon is a she, and she is the mother of the son. Yet, outside this room, I know that plenty of educated and erudite people, even educated and erudite women, including myself for that matter, and I confess, do not see this at first blush. They puzzle over it in circles, and they wonder whether it could be the uncle, the grandfather, the stepfather, the surrogate father, some sort of alternative family structure that they have no clue about. But it's actually the mother. Unfortunately, when it comes to thinking about women in powerful position, we are too often blinded by the daggers of the mind, infected by the malignant mind bugs that mire us in the prejudices of the past. You know this. It's your daily fight all over the world, from Tunisia to Afghanistan to this country. And because we know that it hurts the economy, and certainly I know that, we put it on the radar of the IMF. A bit unusual, I have to say, not necessarily core mandate, as I was told by a few. I'll let you guess who they were. But the message is very simple. We need a 21st century mentality for women's economic participation. We need to flush away the flotsam of ingrained gender inequality. It's not just a moral imperative. It's not only a political empowerment. It's an economic imperative. And I'll try to demonstrate that to you. I'll try to demonstrate that on the basis of what I often proclaim, which is dare the difference. Doesn't have to be exactly the same. It involves an element of risk about it, but the difference actually can contribute a lot more than imitation. And I'm going to address that from 3 L's perspective, not L like in wings in French, although it could take us further. The L of learning, the L of labor, and the L of leadership. So let me begin with learning. By this I mean the overriding importance of women's education, foundation upon which everything else must be built. In my view, education is both an elevator and a springboard. It allows people to raise themselves up and to break down the divides that keep them apart. At its best, education is a breaker of shackles, the shackles of exclusion and insularity. And education, it's not a new thing, has always been the wide avenue of opportunity. And it was the US trailblazing education policy that helped drive its economic leadership across the 20th century. And gender equality was a crucial component of that strategy. And so was, for that matter, respect and tolerance, even when the views to be heard are slightly different. Now, as we face up to the great challenges of the 21st century, we must continue to bet on education, especially for women. Let me just give you a few numbers that some of you are probably very familiar with. Women account for about 41% of science and engineering doctorates here in the United States, yet they form less than 25% of the workforce in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. As you said, Madeleine, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the difference between 41% and 25%, and we therefore can do better. That's for the US. And you can take each advanced economy and have a look at the proportions and the gaps, and you will find them. But where it matters even more, where investment in education is mission critical, is in the developing world, where girls and women can make a huge difference, as was clearly indicated by Ikram. Gains for girls can be substantial. One study suggests that an extra year of primary school boosts earning potential for 10 to 20%, and an extra year of secondary school, an extra 25%. Ultimately, when women do well, society can do better. A study of 60 developing countries estimated that the economic loss from not educating girls at the same level as boys amounted to a loss of $90 billion. Now, it might, for those of you who play around with numbers, 90 billion might not be that big. But for the developing world, it is huge, and that's a big loss. Now, in addition to that, women are also likely to be the wise consumers. Another study has clearly indicated that they spend about 90% of their earnings on education and health, while at the same time men will spend 30 to 40% of their earnings on the same matters of education and health. As the old African adage says, if you educate a boy, you train a man. If you educate a girl, you train a community. So we must carry the banner for women's education. It's not a threat. It is not a threat. It's a blessing. And we must make it a global priority. That is why girls like Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan, who faced down Taliban assassins to demand the right to an education, are admirable. That is why groups like Boko Haram in Nigeria, who kidnap and sell into slavery young girls who simply want to go to schools, are despicable, and they themselves should be found and forced to go to school for life. Yeah. So I think we can all actually join the voices of those who say, bring back our girls, and respect our girls. Let them be educated. Now let me now turn to my second L, which is labour. Letting women achieve their potential in the world of work. As Madeleine said, they represent half the population. Yet they represent less than half of measured economic activity. Now, in your mind, you think, okay, 50%, 25%, not right. Something that I said as well which matters, which is measured economic activity. Because there's a lot of unmeasured economic activity, and guess what? Who does that? Women in the main. I'll come back to that in a second. Today, there are about 865 million women around the world who have the potential to contribute more fully. That's what I would call the almost blocked billion, a blocked billion. Everywhere around the world, men participate more than women. These gender gaps range from 12% in the OECD countries to 50% in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, when they participate, which is a lot less than men, as we just saw, they tend to get stuck in low-paying, low-status jobs. And globally, women earn only about 3/4 as much as men. And that is true with the same level of education, with the same position, and not exactly what we would call equal pay for equal work. Women are also overrepresented. Ah, you say, women are overrepresented. Great. Wait. In the informal sector of the economy, unprotected, unskilled work with unstable earnings and generally zero pension scheme to go with it. Too often they carry the burden of work that is unpaid, unseen, unreported, underappreciated, and certainly hardly ever measured. Globally, they spend twice as much time on household chores as men and 4 times as much time on childcare. Now, with this stark reality, it is hardly surprising that it is generally girls and women who are the main victims of extreme poverty. They make up 70% of the billion people trying to live on less than $1 a day. And they are the first, invariably, to be submerged in any economic or financial crisis. We can do better than that. Too many women are unaccounted for, underutilized, and generally overexploited. So, not just a moral imperative, not just a political tool, but an economic imperative. Because when they contribute more, economies do better. We have done research on that at the IMF, and we know that eliminating gender gaps in economic participation can lead to big jumps in income per capita. Now, as I said, it's not a perfect measurement because we measure income per capita on the basis of GDP. And GDP is not the ideal or single measurements because it doesn't account for a lot of externalities, as it's nicely called. Meaning work done at home, among other things. Now, these gains are visible everywhere, but there are places around the planet where it's even more visible than that. Like the Middle East and North Africa, about 27%. There would be a 27% increase of income per capita if women were given the same access as men to the workplace. And South Asia, 23%. And really, for those that are supportive of the aggregate demand improvement, women are the ideal agents for that because they are the consumers. 70% of consumption is actually decided by women. I know it comes across as a bit of a surprise, especially when you look at car purchases, computer purchases. Well, talk to any big car manufacturers, they will tell you what matters most, the targets. No matter what range of car it is it's decided predominantly by women. Gentlemen who are great to be here with us tonight, sorry to disappoint you, but women around you are much more decisive when it comes to selecting a car. So how can we get women to participate more in the labour market, to be economic agents? Well, certainly some of the tools that were mentioned earlier are absolutely right, like modifying the laws on property, on ownership, on inheritance. Why is that? As a matter of equality, as a matter of morality? No. Because how can you access credit if you don't have collaterals? And the women who do not have a right to own property, land, or to inherit from their parents simply do not have access to collateral unless it is provided for by a man, the husband. Economic policy can also be a forceful agent of change. In the developing countries, the uplifting of women begins invariably with healthcare, access to education and training. And it means, together with the benefit of collaterals, access to credit so that they can find themselves a space where they are independent and can exercise their industry. We take this seriously at the IMF, and our programs include a particular attention to safety nets, to make sure that access to credit, for instance, is safeguarded, to make sure that there is that protection from a social point of view so that women are not prejudiced against. We actually have evidence, because that was conducted by third parties, that those countries that have gone under programs with the IMF have actually spent more money on education and health over the course of not just their program, but also thereafter. We're also doing work on the economics of inequality and exclusion, and it is usually women who are left out. I've just come back from a conference in Amman in Jordan on the Arab transition countries and what is the future. The big takeaway is an inclusive economy with a shared vision and leadership. Again, I would like to commend the great work that Aswat Nisa does. You're not only empowering women, but you're also providing that springboard from which new societies will arise that will not be based on exclusion, but on inclusion. But richer countries also have to do the level playing field. They need more pro-women, more pro-family policies, policies like publicly funded parental leave, quality affordable childcare, individual instead of family income taxation, which invariably, when it is family taxation, taxes the second salary. And guess what it is? Usually the women's salary. Tax credits or benefits for low-wage workers, and so on and so forth. We have done that extensively, and we have pushed that envelope in both Japan and Korea. And I'm pleased to report that both Prime Minister Abe and President Park have taken those objectives on board and are actually designing their budget policies and designing some of their policies in order to empower women and to give them access to the labour market. There was a bit of catch-up to be done. And we know that these policies can work because we've seen it. In Brazil, for instance, the family-oriented policies, and by that I mean family in the sense that it includes everybody, it does not exclude, and it does not restrict the woman's place to the house. But those family policies have actually helped move the needle from 45% to 60% of women participation in the workplace, just in 2 decades. 45%, 60%. If you look at Sweden, that's another example of a country that has done a lot and which has one of the highest female participation rate in the world. In large part because of what? Because of childcare and early education, because of flexible work, because of parental leave policies. That is also the case, by the way, in the Netherlands, that has pushed almost the same sorts of tools in order to allow women a space in the workplace. But it's not just about policies. I've listed a few of those: structural changes, legal changes, specific tax policies, fiscal policies, programs that are designed to support. It's also about the culture. It's about what we have in our brain. It's about this sort of very sometimes rampant and inconspicuous macho mentality that prevails in the workplace. In what she calls the last chapter of Gender Convergence, Claudia Goldin argues that the gender pay gap might go away if firms stopped insisting on people working exceedingly long hours. In other words, if they value creative time more than face time. This is already happening in sciences and technology. But having been a prime witness of what happens in the legal field or in finance, I can tell you that there is a lot of ground to cover. Filling in the timesheet, pretending you're at work. So it's about time to complete that last chapter, and we cannot rest until we have achieved that equality in the workplace. It's within our grasp if we reach out to both women and men. Now let me move to my third L. I've talked about learning, education, I've talked about labor. Final link in the chain is leadership. Letting women rise to the top on their strength and their abilities, and fix to break again that glass ceiling that you talked about, Madeleine. We all know the situation and the problem. The higher you go up that ladder, the fewer women there are. The evidence is painfully obvious. Look at the world of business. Only 4% of CEOs in the Standard & Poor's 500 company list are women. Plus, as this institute has demonstrated and as you have indicated, only about 20% of parliamentary seats are occupied by women, and only 10% of leaders in countries around the world are female. And yet, if you look at it, and if you have a bit of empirical evidence, women are better leaders. One study shows that the Fortune 500 firms with the best track record in raising women to prominent positions are anywhere between 20 to 69% more profitable than median firms in their same area. Now, you might challenge, because that's a big number, but it's invariably in the same direction. Women are also less likely to engage in the kind of reckless, risk-taking behavior that sparked the global financial crisis. For example, an experiment from the investment community in the late 90s shows that men trade 45% more than women and are much more likely to lose big. And it's really not a coincidence that while men were cheerleading, it was the women who were crying most about financial sector excess and misbehavior before the crisis. I'm thinking of women like Sheila Blair, Brooks Liborn, Janet Yellen, yes, and Elizabeth Warren. But too often they were ignored or dismissed, sometimes characterized with funny names. Yet they were proven right. We also know that women are generally good managers and good crisis leaders. There have been studies on that, and it's clearly the case. Now, it's also clearly the case that when the situation is really dire and when there is hardly any hope left, then you call a woman.
Okay, do you understand this, please? Then tell me the answers. What are the three essentials of empowerment? Yes, the three essentials of women empowerment are learning, labor, and leadership. Good. Then second question. What is the role of learning in empowering women? Yes, learning helps women to help themselves and break the shackles of exclusion. One more question. How can we promote more opportunities for women in the workplace? Think. How can we promote more opportunities for women in the workplace? Yes, more opportunities can be promoted for women in the workplace by changing laws in support of women and by protecting them from discrimination. Yes, good.